Is it time for a mind shift? If you don't know what that means, then join your host, Dr. Clint Haycock, a former evangelical Christian pastor and Bible college teacher of over 20 years, along the journey of deconstruction and reconstruction of faith, life, religion, and spirituality.
Welcome, everybody, to this very special bonus episode of Mindshift Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Clint Haycock. I have got a fantastic conversation with my good friend Janice Selbie from Canada coming up in just a few minutes. I wanted to get this podcast out, so I didn't really have time to edit it, so I'm just going to get it out there. But she's got a fantastic workshop. She's run it a few times before, and I've helped her promote it. It's called Divorcing Religion, and I'm helping her get the word out because this thing starts really, really soon. Actually, the 7th of November is the first session of this group therapy workshop. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. I've talked to her many times about what she does. If you've left religion, if you've left a cult, if you've left any sort of like high control group, fundamentalist religion, Christianity, or Mormonism, or Jehovah's Witness, any group, any cult, any religion, and you're seeking to rebuild your life, this is the workshop for you. You want to be a part of this Divorcing Religion workshop, and it's a very small group, so the numbers are going to close pretty quick. However, the good news is she'll be running it again, and you can always communicate with her. I just wanted to mention really quickly before we get into the chat with Janice, what's coming up here. I've got some just amazing stuff in the pipeline, some recordings I've already done. I talked to Peter Montgomery of the Right Wing Watch just the other day. We did a very deep dive into the Texas abortion law, and that's a very timely episode, especially as it's just about to go to the Supreme Court. And in fact, there's another law in the state of Missouri, I think it is, and that is also coming up before the Supreme Court. So the Christian right, the Dominionists, they've been pushing really, really hard to get these laws passed. And of course, their ultimate aim is to overturn Roe versus Wade and turn America back into a Christian nation. So look out for that episode with Peter Montgomery coming up. And then just the other day, I got up early. I had a really fantastic conversation with my really good friend, Dr. Josie McSkimming out of Sydney, Australia. We talked about recovering from fundamentalist religion and religious trauma syndrome. We talked about religion and mental health. So that is another fantastic episode. And then I think it is on the 15th of November, I've got a conversation scheduled with another very good friend, Frank Schaefer. I get to interview him about his brand new book that's just coming out. I believe it is on the 2nd or 3rd of November, so within a day or two of this actual episode dropping. So I get to interview Frank on his Facebook page. I'm so excited. I'm looking forward to that. I cannot wait to talk to Frank Schaefer about his new book, which is titled Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy. And I've read the book. I've talked to Frank before. In fact, we did a recording this summer. A group of us met on Zoom, and we grilled Frank for about an hour and a half. So that is also going to be coming out, that conversation that we had this summer about his new book. We're going to be dropping that on his Facebook page as well, and probably on my Facebook page as well. So that is super cool to have that coming up with Frank Schaefer as we discuss his new book. So anyway, let's get on into the conversation with Janice Selbie, my good friend from Canada. We're going to be talking about not just the upcoming Divorcing Religion workshop, but we're also going to give you a sneak preview to her CORT 2022. That is the Conference on Religious Trauma. I was fortunate enough to be a part of her CORT 2021. This last year, this summer, I was part of a panel discussion with David Hayward, the Naked Pastor, Tim Sledge, and it was moderated by Dan Barker of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So she's got another conference in the pipeline coming up sometime in 2022, the Conference on Religious Trauma. So you're getting a 2-for-1 here. So let's go on into the conversation with Janice Selbie as we talk about not just divorcing religion, but the Conference on Religious Trauma as well. I'm chatting with my very, very good friend, Janice Selbie, all the way from Canada. Good morning, Janice. It's morning there, isn't it? Something 10 o'clock in the morning?
Is. Yeah,
I know you got
awake.
up early. Yeah. And it's evening here in the UK, but you sent me an email. I think it was this morning I got it when I woke up. You were planning one of your divorcing religion workshops. This is not the first one you've done, but I thought, how can I help Janice get the word out about this workshop?
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And actually, when you and I first connected a few years back, it was because I had just completed writing and coming up with this workshop. And I reached out to you because I wanted to talk about it. So
That's
it's
true.
pretty neat. I've gone through the workshop several times now. Lots of people from different backgrounds, very different backgrounds, but all from fundamentalist types. So former Orthodox Jew, former Catholic, former evangelical, lots of evangelicals, a number of former pastors that have come through and missionaries, and all different ages. And it's people who are now working on building their secular life and community. They're sometimes, if it's fairly fresh, they're going, wait a minute, what just happened? And some people have been out for decades, and they just feel like now they're ready to start processing some of what they went through. And of course, for some people, if they were clergy or missionary, church related, they've now lost their livelihood. And they're trying to figure out, well, what do I do? What skills do I have? How am I going to support my family? And then for other people like me, I had been married to a pastor for a time, but for most of my involvement in the church, it was just, I was deeply committed. I was always on worship team or leading children's group, this sort of thing. And it was such a central aspect of my life. It was like everything else was tethered to that and attached to that. So when I lost my faith or left my faith, it really was a free fall. It was just existential crisis. And I wished that I knew someone who had been as devout as me, that
someone
I
like
could talk to.
That's Where were you all those years ago?
Anyone. That's right. Here I am now.
Blazing the trail, Janice.
That's right. And so then eventually, after a few years, I discovered Marlene Winnell, Dr. Winnell. You've had her as a guest on your program before. And she wrote the book, Leaving the Fold. So she's a real pioneer in this field of religious trauma and religious trauma syndrome. And then I connected with Marlene and went to some of her retreats and did, helped facilitate a little bit at some of her retreats and developed my own workshop, and which was super cathartic for me, actually. So I arranged it. It's a 6-week program, 6 Sunday mornings from 10 until noon Pacific, like church time. And it's a small group, never more than 10 of us. And we get together and talk about what we've learned in each module. And I have it set up so that the modules reflect stages of a divorce, of a marital divorce. It's called the Divorcing Religion Workshop, because guess what? At the same time, I was also going through divorce. And it just made sense, because losing my faith really felt like I was losing a partner. It was intensely painful. It was actually more painful than the loss of my marriage, which had been going on for several years, whereas the loss of my faith felt somewhat more abrupt. And it was just terrifying trying to figure out who am I. So it's set up into these 6 modules where we look at, how do you and religion meet? And then you have to grieve your losses and look at a separation agreement, which people don't typically think of in terms of religion, but it can be really helpful, because at some point you may have been baptized, or you stood up and gave public testimony, or, even made a pledge, an oath, a promise, whatever it was. And those were made under duress, emotional duress, psychological duress, spiritual duress, and particularly if we were a child or an adolescent, or just at a vulnerable time in our life, which is, of course, when we come into religion and cults, it's always in a vulnerable time. So we look at separation agreement, identity reconstruction, another really important one that we talk about. One I call plenty of fish, because we have to find and build our new communities, which has been super interesting with the pandemic going on.
That it has. Thankfully, we can do Zoom calls, and like we're doing right now. I'm in the UK, you're in Canada, and yet we can meet up. I messaged you earlier today and said, hey, do you want to do a thing? And you're like, yes, let's do it. So we set it up in a few minutes, and now it's already happening.
Yeah.
Well, I love the metaphor, because it's like you say, it's such an apt metaphor, the divorcing religion, because on the one hand, you say it's like a divorce and all the relationship aspects and the painfulness of it. But then on the other hand, there are so many people that I'm sure you've encountered who got divorced as a result of one partner deconstructing and leaving the faith, whereas the other one wanted to stay in and perhaps double down. So on that level, it's a literal divorce in some cases. It's destroyed marriages, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah. And you just really feel for actually both partners in that situation.
Sure.
So whether you're both secular when you get married and one then leaves the faith, or whether you're both deeply religious when you marry and or one joins and one loses, like that. It's really hard on both partners, and it's hard on the children as well, particularly if the still religious partner is very fearful and they're saying mommy's going to hell or daddy's going to hell, and just be so difficult on everyone involved. And unfortunately, sometimes it's not possible to bridge that gap. It is, if both partners can remember, just focus on the love that they have and the affection that they have for one another, and keep trying to find commonalities and build new common things they can do together, because the person is still the same. Just this aspect of their life has changed. So if they would have stopped to help someone fix a flat tire before they lost their faith, chances are they're still that person. They're still going to stop and help someone. But they're not going to keep attending services, Bible study. And then, of course, when you're raising kids, it's also tricky because there can be discipline and boundary issues where very religious parents are parenting out of fear that the devil is going to get their child. And, so they might have a lot of really firm and hard black and white boundaries. And when we're no longer bound by that fear, we can have more flexibility in our parenting. I'm going to put in a plug here for my podcast. You have a fantastic podcast. I have a great one also. It's with my friend Courtney Hurd, who's called The Godless Mom on social media. And our podcast is called The Godless Moms. And she grew up in an atheist home. I grew up in a religious home. Now we're both secular. And so we tackle issues related to secular parenting.
Yeah, it's such a thing, isn't it? Well, and I was going back to what you said earlier. I wanted to ask you a question. You mentioned something about whether you've just come out of religion or you've been out maybe a long time. Is there kind of an age range, not an age range, but rather a time period where you might say, man, if you just came out of religion a week ago and you left your church or your cult or whatever, is that too soon to be a part of your workshop? Or would you want them to kind of have walked down that road a little bit for maybe a few months first?
I think a few months is probably a reasonable thing before we're plunging into group work. Now, I also work as a religious recovery consultant. I have clients around the world. And in Canada, I'm a registered professional counselor. This is where I've done my schooling. And so I do accept clients and work with clients one-on-one. And they can be very freshly out of their faith, or even perhaps they haven't even come out to their family, their spouse or whatever, but their burden is tangible, how hard it is. And so, I can point them to some different resources and also just give them an opportunity to talk and question. So I make sure they know that I am not religious or spiritual in any way, and I'll never be pointing them back to religion or to religious resources. I believe that they're capable of standing on their own and getting through any crisis. They don't need to be looking to religion for that. I'm a humanist, a secular humanist as well. So yeah, I think 3 months is a reasonable time to want somebody to have been out of their religion or along on their journey anyway. Right.
And as you said, it might be better to go through individual counseling with you for a while first before they jump into a group session. That's true. One of the other things I noticed about your email was that in the blurb about the workshop coming up, which I think is coming up November 7th is when it starts.
Yeah, it's like a week from
very
now.
soon. But you say something about the holidays. Are you being pressured to be part of religious services? Are you being pressured by family? Because, of course, if you're in a religious family, you've got Thanksgiving, you've got Christmas, you've got all these holidays coming up that are very steeped in religious tradition. How much is that playing a factor in just the timing of this course starting in November?
Yeah, that's exactly why I wanted to do one in November, because it's such a such a time of pressure for people whose parents especially, but yeah, extended family, if they're deeply religious, you're going to be getting it. You're going to be getting some pressure, and it can be really helpful to let off steam with other people who can relate and understand, and maybe have some strategies that they can offer and share. And yeah, there comes a time for boundary setting and boundary enforcing, and boy, that can be such a hard thing to do. People love their family so much, and they really fear the loss of that relationship. The truth of the matter is, your relationship is going to change. It's probably not going to remain as deep as it was when you don't have that one central item that you believe in. And of course, your family members are going to be terrified that you're going to hell and that you won't have eternity with them, whatever other things they tell themselves. So we need to be aware of that. And if we do come out, when we do come out to our family and share with them that we no longer believe, we need to consider our motives when we're doing it, and consider their possible reactions and responses and what the outcome might be. If you're beholden to them for financial aid, or if you're potentially in a dangerous situation, you really need to think through, kind of have a safety plan in place. But it is strategy. Going to change. Yes, it is going to change your relationship with them, because that's just what happens. And there's a good chance you'll also lose many from your community who just won't feel safe. It's like they fear the apostasy. They're scared they can catch it from you. And so they just kind of go silent.
Or they shun you, which is a classic. We know this happens. And that might be a fear of the person, like you say, who's contemplating coming out to their friends and family, that they may get shunned. And certain cults and religions, that is an actual practice. And they will shun you. You will lose all relation. They will cut you off.
Yes.
And suddenly you're out literally in the cold. And all that's just gone.
We see this particularly with folks who leave Jehovah's Witness and folks who leave Mormonism. Of course, it's probably most famous with the Amish. But there are definitely groups that practice shunning, and it is such a despicable, terrible practice. People have killed themselves over it, or a number of people, many people, they just can't take the shunning, and so they return to their group, and then they're living in a constant state of incongruity with their own beliefs, which really can take a toll on us as well.
It's true. And as we know, groups and cults, they can implant that phobia in the followers. Don't let that happen to you. If they've made an example of someone, see, we shunned her and they're now out in the cold. If you are going to leave, this is what's going to happen to you. So it's not just an implicit threat, it's an explicit threat.
Yes. And of course, then if the person leaves and they suddenly don't have any more support, and they do end up having to be in a line of work that is less than desirable, and then those still in the cult told you, but actually what's happening is it's another step on the person's journey as they're finding their feet. And the same with, I know I've heard you mention on your podcast before that when people leave, it's almost like they can go into a second adolescence. This certainly was the case with me.
Same with me.
It was a gong show for a few years there, until I found my feet and rebuilt my secular identity and felt stable and secure in who I am. So, that's pretty hard on my kids. I'm sure hard on people who loved me to see me go from one extreme to the other. Yeah, it's not an easy time. So
It isn't.
let's be kind and supportive to people who are in that predicament.
Mhm. So that's the Divorcing Religion workshop. What can you tell us about costs and times and all the basic info? If someone's interested and says, yes, that sounds like something I really, really need, how do I find out more information about this
Excellent.
course?
Yeah, great question. Thanks. My website is divorcing-religion.com. So there's that little dash, divorcing-religion.com. And the cost is $299 American. And I don't want cost to keep people out. If someone really feels like they need this, I'll work with them as much as I can to make it affordable for them. And if I can't get them in this round, because we have a limit on how many people, I'll keep them in mind for the next one in the new year. And we'll do it Sunday mornings. It's 6 consecutive mornings, starting November 7th, ending December 12th. And it runs from 10 until noon PST. And the very last module that we do, it's a bonus module. I call it Mind Control. Don't let an old flame burn you twice, because we can be vulnerable again then when we leave, because we're still so used to the black and white type of thinking, and it feels very comfortable for us, much more comfortable than the gray. And so we can fall in. We also have lost our community, so we're vulnerable as far as if another group says, hey, come and sit with us, and and they love bomb you, and you're so excited and overwhelmed by these things, and next thing you know, oh, this feels familiar, don't really
It's true.
really like this. And that happened with me when I left Christianity. I pitched my tent in the New Age camp for a number of years because I loved exploring things that were formerly forbidden, astrology and crystals and chakras and psychics and all these different things. Until then, people started talking a lot about channeling, and I was like, you have got to be kidding.
Really?
Are you kidding? They're doing it with a straight face. I'm like, oh my God. And then I noticed there was dogma as well. You were expected to believe like this. What do you mean you don't believe it? What do you mean you don't support that? What do you mean you're not going to see this speaker and that speaker and buy this book and that book and all that kind of stuff? And I just got to a point where I was like, I don't need that either. I'm capable of standing on my own and figuring out what's important to me, and I'm allowed to explore anything. I can adopt something as far as beliefs go, and then if new information comes to light, I can let that go and move on to something else. I have that freedom and that liberty.
Absolutely. And it's so important, isn't it, that education piece? Because I've heard that same story from a number of people that they left whatever religion or group and then jumped into another one thinking they were exploring new alternative realities, which I guess it was. But if you haven't educated yourself, if you haven't gotten that therapy and support, you might end up jumping out of the frying pan and into a bigger fire.
Yes, and I know you've spoken with Dr. Steve Hassan before, and Dr. Yanya Lalich also, and Steve Hassan, of course, with the BITE model, as far as whether something is a cult or not. And Dr. Lalich is just great. And then Rick Allen Ross also, I had him speak at CORT in May. So yeah, it's important to educate ourselves about how beliefs form. And are we holding our beliefs or are they holding us? Because it's a shift there, and it's an important thing to keep in mind.
It is. Okay, so that's the Divorcing Religion conference. However, there's something else that we need to talk about, which is the conference on religious trauma. You've mentioned it already. I was so honored to be a part of last year. We had a fantastic discussion. It was the Naked Pastor, David Hayward, myself, Tim Sledge, and Dan Barker from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. That went by so fast. I think it was an hour. And I'm like, what the hell? This has gone whizzing past.
It was great. So and I got so much feedback on yours in particular, because I think we had a lot of ex-clergy who were participating, who had bought tickets, and it was very meaningful for them to to witness your conversation, and they could just relate to so much of it. You guys are all so likable. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. Really good friends. And in fact, I'll put a shameless plug in. I'm actually scheduled to talk with David Hayward next week. So that podcast will be coming out. I thought I've not spoken with the Naked Pastor for way too long. We need to do a catch up. So yeah, I've got him scheduled, booked in. But so you're planning a CORT 2022. Is that right?
I can hardly believe it. And
fast.
It is. And when I was first planning CORT, I didn't know if I'd even have 30 people that were interested, because you're asking people to spend money, you're asking them to commit their time, this sort of thing. Well, then the virus comes along and everything had to be instead go online, because it was going to be in person. This year, we're going to do it online again because things are still pretty sketchy with the virus. But I had over 300 people who purchased tickets and wanted to attend. And the tickets are still available. I mean, the resources, the recordings are still available. People can purchase those. So now I'm looking at CORT 2022, and it'll be sometime between April and June, I think. And so I am accepting applications for people to speak. And a couple of the topics that I'm very interested in. One is the toll of religious schooling, including religious homeschooling. Like, what are the dangers there? What are some of the experiences that people have had? And how does that factor in also? And this might be a part where I involve you again, if you're interested in talking about that role, that homeschooling, and how it all fits in with the very Christian fundamentalist agenda, particularly in the United States. And so that's a big one: homeschooling, religious schooling, education, basically. And then in Canada, we've had a pretty rough year this last year as far as our First Nations and Indigenous people go, with the discovery using ground penetrating radar of thousands of bodies of children in unmarked graves attached to former Indian residential schools. It's a horrifying, and to the Indigenous people, that was not new. They have known about this, and they have tried to tell the non-Indigenous society, government, police, and they were not listened to. So now there's no denying it. It's come to light. The Catholic Church has a lot to answer for. Those, pardon me,
Can you say it without starting to swear?
Brings out the worst in me.
I know.
So that's another aspect that I really want to discuss at CORT. I want to be looking at the role of religion, so particularly Christianity, and yes, Catholicism, but other Protestant groups also were involved, United Church, Anglican Church, so forth. I want to look at their role in cultural genocide of Indigenous peoples around the world. So especially in Canada, but around the world. And so this is where maybe some former missionaries might be interested, former priests might want to talk. And recently, now I understand, the big cheese himself, the Pope, is going to be coming to Canada so that he can help somehow in reconciliation. He's refused to apologize for his church's role. And also they promised millions and millions of dollars to survivors, and that has never materialized. So right now I'm working with some First Nations colleagues. We've been doing an interesting project called Journey to Understanding Each Other. And because non-Indigenous Canadians, we really don't have a good grasp of what it is to be Indigenous in Canada, and some of the atrocities that have happened, and why the Indigenous communities today suffer as they do and look the way that they do. And so our aim is to try and bridge that gap, to make some understanding, building a bridge to move our country forward. We want to heal the divide as much as possible in our country. And it starts by listening and understanding each other. So it's a cause that's very dear to my heart. And so if anyone's interested, if someone's been a missionary or a former priest or pastor and knows about the cultural genocide aspect committed by the church, I'd really love to hear from you.
It's really a good thing that you're covering that aspect of it as well. I mean, it's all tied with colonialism, and the church is all in bed with the whole thing. I remember reading all those articles that were coming out when those stories broke, and it was heartbreaking, angering. Think, my God, they were forcing these children into these Catholic schools, basically run by the state somehow, but ripping them out of to make them quote unquote Canadian, it was just, and that meant religious indoctrination, all kinds of abuses occurred. So just a shocking story.
And their goal, and it was the same in the United States, because there were many residential schools and industrial schools in the United States as well. And the goal was to remove the Indian from the child, they said. And they did that by beating them and torturing them, essentially starving them, not allowing them to speak their language, cutting them off from their family, their traditions. It's just, and then when we finally stopped that, it is shocking. In 1996, the last residential school closed.
Wasn't even that long ago.
It wasn't that long ago, but then the 60s scoop had begun in the 1960s, and that was in Canada, where the RCMP and social workers, at the behest of the government, they would go onto the reserves or reservations where we forced our First Nations people to live, and they would just round up the children and take them off there and send them out to evangelical or Christian white families to adopt them. Some of them got taken from parts of Canada and shipped all the way over to the United States. And the parents then in the United States, the new foster parents, they would adopt them and even just tell the children, oh, you're Italian. Like, they wouldn't say anything about their background. So the kids grow up and don't even have a knowledge at all. And they're completely disconnected. And my sister, this is where my passion comes from. When I was 4 years old, my evangelical parents also did that. We fostered a First Nations female. She was 7, so 3 years older than me. And she came to live with us, and I didn't know anything about it. Mom just said, hey, you're getting a big sister today, which I thought was pretty exciting. And she showed up at the front door. I'm like, this must be just how it happens. Yeah. And I grew up never questioning or understanding, just really with the obnoxious concept of feling that she should be grateful. She should be grateful to be with our family. We rescued her, and I never wanted to ask her about her past because I didn't want to hurt her. But also just with that whole colonial mindset. So fast forward to when I was in my 40s and I went back to school, divorced religion, divorced my husband, went back to school to become a counselor. And that's when I first started learning about the 60s scoop. And I was utterly mortified and horrified by it. And so I reconnected with my sister. We'd been in and out of touch over the years, not terribly close. She lives in another city. But that was such a hard conversation because it was, I felt so terrible, just terrible. And she was very gracious. She is a gracious person and has been just kind-hearted, and it's been hard on her because her, her First Nations family didn't entirely accept her back, and then she's not entirely accepted in the white world, Caucasian European world. So where do people fit if you're told you're not this enough or you're not that enough? It's just a really heartbreaking situation that never needed to happen. And the reason it did happen is because of the original Indian Act that Canada put in place in the 1870s when they started opening the residential schools. So our government has a lot to answer for. The church has a lot to answer for. And the time to address it is now. I'd also, of course, be very interested in having Indigenous guests at court this year, sharing their stories and their thoughts on truth and reconciliation.
I'm so glad you adding that into the CORT 2022, because I was sitting there thinking when you were describing the situation with your sister and the Indigenous people of Canada and North America, that where I get so focused on our experiences within religion. To me, that's religious trauma, which it is, but this is also religious trauma. So
yeah.
you've got to look at that whole huge aspect as well, the impact that it's had on generations of
Mhm.
people. So
Mhm.
I'm really glad you're adding that into the CORT 2022.
Thank you. And a part of it that is tricky for me to navigate is the fact that a lot of the folks who were forced into residential school and were horribly mistreated, abused, tormented, tortured by the priests, they actually did end up converting to Catholicism. It's like that
Mm-hmm.
Stockholm syndrome, right? And even to this day, many of them still would claim Catholicism as their religion. And that can make the dialogue part of it very tricky as well. And so there's a time for me to talk and there's a time for me to listen. And when someone is sharing their trauma, it's the time for me to listen. And I don't get to make decisions for other people at all
Mm-hmm.
about what they should and shouldn't do. And
Absolutely not.
but as someone who has left religion and knows that it's very possible to live a healthy and fulfilling secular life, but I also am a member of the dominant culture. I can snap my fingers, I call 911 and I know the police are going to come and be
Mm-hmm.
here, within a couple minutes. And their first question to me isn't going to be, have you been drinking? Which, members of Indigenous communities, those are the type of systemic racism issues
Yeah.
that they have to deal with. So
Built in.
that part's tricky, and I'm doing my best to navigate it with compassion and wisdom.
Mm-hmm. So in addition to the religious trauma that people like you and I experience, there's this whole other aspect. I'm glad you brought that up. So then the question, how can people find out more information about CORT 2022? We've already got the workshop. I'll put the links to all this in the show notes, but where can they go to find out about buying tickets for CORT 2022?
Sure. We right now, my good friend Courtney, she's putting together a website for CORT, because we didn't have an actual firm website. People had to go through the Feed Loop, which was the platform that we hosted the website on last year. So Courtney's busy making a CORT website for us. So I'll pass that along to you for sure as soon as that information is up and running. And for now, anyone who's interested can send me an email, janice.selbie@gmail.com, if they're interested in speaking, if they're interested in the conference. And then once I've got all that up and running, I'll start giving more information. I think it's going to be marvelous. I'm really looking forward to it.
It was so good last year, so it can only get better from here. I'm so excited that you're doing it again.
It'll be shorter this time. Last time it went on over 5 days, because boy, go big or go home when I'm starting something out for the first time. This time I'm going to try and just do it over the course of a weekend, maybe start Friday afternoon and then finish by Sunday afternoon. Of course, having it online makes it available to people all around the world. And then they can also purchase the recordings after the fact, so people can watch it anytime. So I think it makes it really accessible.
Absolutely. Yes. In fact, you and I are going to be guests I know we have another mutual friend, Dr. Terry Daniel.
That's right.
She's doing a conference in Portland in July. But I physically can't make it. I'm still in work till the day that it starts. However, I can jump on Zoom and I could be doing my presentation. You're going to be, I don't know if you're going to go down to Portland, but we can do it all
I'm
online.
hoping to. I like Oregon. I'd like to get out there.
I wish I could go, because we lived there for about 13 years, but I can't make it.
I knew you lived in Washington. I didn't know you lived in Oregon too.
Yeah, I grew up in Seattle, and then we moved down to Portland. I went to Bible college and seminary and all that. So that was my home. I was a pastor of a church there. So Portland is like my second home. I wish I could go, but and I know Terry, where she lives, is really close to where I used to live. So every time I talk to her, I'm
so
like,
cool.
Oh, have you gone to this restaurant and that pub and that place? I know exactly where she's at, So
and we'll be talking world. at her conference. You will be, and I will be. I think Seth Andrews, who was a recent guest of yours, he's also going to be. It'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to what people have to say.
It's all about death, grief, and dying and religion and all that. So that's going to be fascinating. So, all right, listen, Janice, we need to go because I've got to get this episode out here this week. I want people to find out about the conference as well as the workshop. So I'm going to get this episode out. I've got to go edit it now and get it out. So I need to let you go. But thank you so much for chatting. Always good to chat and meet up again.
It's a joy. Okay, take care, my friend.